Hello. So in this video, I'm going to talk about Yasmina Reza's play, The God of Carnage. I'll preface this by saying that I know virtually nothing about contemporary French theater. It's simply not an area that I've read much about, or I haven't read many of the plays. Reza is probably about the only contemporary French playwright that I could name, but I really, really like her work. So I've seen God of Carnage a couple of times, and I'm going to be doing a video on another one of her plays called Art, which I've seen once. One of the things I really like about Reza is that her plays are very short, comparatively. They take about 90 minutes to perform, which means that they're performed without an intermission, which I personally really love. Like, I get why the intermission is important, but if I could do away with it, generally speaking, I would. But the other component of this, the fact that these plays are short, they're also really tightly constructed. Like, there's not, even though there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of bits and pieces that occur, there's not a lot of waste because the plays are very taut. She is extremely good at creating conflict in this almost sort of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf type way, where she takes these sort of middle class people generally, or sort of upper middle class people, these are representatives of French values, French stability, etc., etc., and basically lets them sort of tear each other apart often over these sort of very small, maybe unexplained things. Not unexplained in the sense that, like, we don't, like, they just happen, but, like, you get the sense, for instance, that a lot of the things that these characters find insulting have some depth to it beyond the sort of surface level of the insult. So this play, The God of Carnage, is about these two couples, Veronique and Michel Vallon, and Annette and Elaine Raye. There has been an altercation between their sons. Veronique and Michel's son has been hit in the face by Annette and Elaine's son with a stick, and he has lost 2 teeth, at least temporarily. When his adult teeth come in, at least one of them hopefully will be fine. But so these two sets of parents get together to try and sort of work things out and sort of decide on a course of action, what kind of strategy they're going to use to try and create peace between their 2 sons, etc. And things go off the rails. Initially, things start fairly cordially, but as the dysfunction within these 2 relationships, within these 2 husband and wife pairings, comes to the forefront, there are these continually shifting sort of alliances between the husbands and wives, and sort of within and between these sets. So they cover a number of different topics here, including questions of guilt and responsibility, questions of international citizenship, primarily because Veronique is writing a book about Darfur, and she's very interested in sort of the politics and cosmopolitan responsibilities that people in France owe to people in Africa and other parts of the world. So they cover those sorts of topics. They cover, or they argue about children's behavior and whether or not violence is a sort of intrinsic component of children's interaction, particularly between boys. They argue about their own sort of marital relationships. Annette hates the fact that Alain, who's a corporate lawyer, is continually on his cell phone, making deals and trying to, over the course of this play, trying to minimize the negative fallout for a pharmaceutical client whose drug has been found to have some negative side effects that they knew about and did not properly disclose. So Elaine keeps sort of going back to that cell phone conversation and trying to work that out, and Annette hates the cell phone, eventually dumping it into a vase full of tulips. But it's these sort of continual conflicts that thread together against this backdrop of their children's violence. And I mean, there's no sort of outright violence between the adults in the play. Veronique does at some point sort of attack Michel, but it seems like it's a fairly sort of brief attack. Here's my cat Frank, by the way. So it seems like it's a fairly sort of incidental thing. Frank, are you gonna move out of the way? You're not if I pet you, are you? Well, so yeah, Veronique does attack Michel at some point, but again, it's not. There's no sort of large-scale violence. Frank, seriously, bud, we gotta move it along here. But the adults who are supposed to be here resolving this situation, who are supposed to be the mature peacemakers, etc., break down over the course of this evening, calling each other names, throwing one another's things around, insulting one another, etc. And so it is this sort of interesting exploration of the inherent capacity maybe for violence, the inherent capacity for the degeneration of what we think of as sort of stable Western middle class values, in a very ironic way, because again, they're supposed to be here as peacemakers.